Now let's go to Peter Doocy live on that rooftop in Paris following President Biden's arrival ahead of the 80th anniversary of D-Day. So, Peter, tomorrow is D-Day, but it sounds like today is Z-Day. It sounds like the president, who they've already called a lid.
That was good, Steve.
He's taking a nap.
Yeah, that was good. Magnifique. Magnifique. I should have checked that before I tried to say French on TV. Thank you. Yeah. Good one. So President Biden is here in France, and he's just a couple minutes away from where our location is at his hotel. But a few minutes after he got there and checked in, White House officials told us not to expect to see him the rest of the day. It's possible he's having meetings with some European leaders, and if that is the case, according to President Biden, they are telling him to do more to stop Trump from taking over. Trump right now, back in the States, he is this week going to make a rare San Francisco appearance for a fundraiser, so the Biden-Harris campaign is sending VP Harris there today for political events. But there's this new Time magazine article where President Biden is claiming about Trump, there's not a major international meeting I attend that before it's over, that a world leader doesn't pull me aside as I'm leaving and say, he can't win, you can't let him win. Tomorrow is going to be the 80th anniversary of the D-Day landings. The plan is for the president to be out at the beaches where 2,501 Americans were among the 4,414 Allied troops who were killed taking those beaches 80 years ago. World War II veterans have been arriving in France ahead of these ceremonies, which are expected to be part of the last major anniversary that World War II veterans are going to be able to attend in their lifetimes. There are only about 150 D-Day veterans still alive today. While the president is out there in Normandy, he is going to meet with Ukraine's President Zelenskyy. This is a President Biden who talks a ton about the possibility of Russia invading Europe from the east, so expect to hear him make a lot of parallels and talk about how things back then, 80 years ago, maybe not that different in his opinion than they are right now. Back to you.
Magnifique, Pierre. Peter.
Yeah, that was terrible.
Regarding the Wall Street Journal article, Peter, where it talks about how the president, according to 45 people, is in cognitive decline than he was a while back. One of the things they say is they describe the president who speaks so softly now, people who are just a few feet away from him can't understand him or can't hear him. You see the president all the time. Have you noticed that he's getting softer and softer?
Sometimes it is so soft that you really have to be paying attention if you're in the room and not able to listen to the microphone that he's talking into. And those are the limited opportunities that they put him out there on camera. The reason that this Wall Street Journal story seems like it's so damaging is because they're talking about all the rest of the times when the president is doing the work. You've got all these Biden officials over the last couple months who say, well, forget about what you see on camera. Behind the scenes, he's always on top of it. The Wall Street Journal is citing Democrats who have known Biden for years and dating back to his days as a senator or as vice president who say that he is showing signs of age. That is the last thing that they need right now as they are trying to regain ground in the general election polls of these swing states against Donald Trump. And so that's a tough one, but at least for today, they're not doing anything about it because the president is here in Paris. And he is doing.
All right,
it's Z-Day.
Au revoir.
All right. Au revoir, Pierre.
Thanks a lot. And let's talk.
Au revoir.
And they do talk about this Ukrainian meeting where he's down there. They're talking about in January the policy, what they need, what they don't need. He's reading his cards and he keeps passing everything over to his people. And he barely even spoke during the whole time. And he said one of the quotes was from an anonymous on the negotiations over Ukraine. You couldn't be there and not feel uncomfortable. Let's just say that. Right. And then Kevin McCarthy's quote is saying, I used to meet with him when he was vice president. I'd go to his house. He is not the same person. Right. So that's the problem. And also his explanations are the problem, the lucid explanations to Time magazine. No one can do what I can do now. Watch me. I could even take you, kind of jokingly challenges the reporter. I mean, he's done that before, and it's been bizarre.
That explains why the world leaders like having him there, because they can get whatever they want. But let's just talk about how crazy that is. And Peter just went into it. They're saying when he's in public,
Right.
You see the note cards. You see sometimes even the questions from the reporters on the note cards, and he has his response scripted. When he messes up on the prompter, when he can't remember things, when he shuffles away, it's much different in private.
Right.
How much sense does that make? That suddenly he turns into a new man.
Yeah.
And he's this different person.
It's such a great point.
Someone that had the opportunity to.
We hear that from all of the people. And you know, the other thing is, and Brian was talking about Kevin McCarthy, the current speaker, Mike Johnson, was talking a little bit about how he would go and talk to the president about negotiations on Ukraine aid and stuff like that. And Joe Biden would launch into a general conversation, and he was under the impression, the speaker was, that Joe Biden didn't realize what the administration had already negotiated.
No.
And it's like, wait a minute, Mr. President, we've already done all that work. And it's like, what?
But to that point, Rachel, I don't want it to get to the point where it was with Dianne Feinstein, where you wait all the way to the end where, all the way to her resignation, she didn't even know that they had put the statement out saying that she had resigned. And I just don't think that it's right of us to get to the point where the person literally has to die in the seat before we say it's time for them to leave.
I'm Steve Doocy.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.